The smell of scorched espresso and danger share more in common than most people realize. Both creep up on you slowly. Both leave a mark that doesn't wash out. Inside Café Onyx on West 57th Street, New York's most feared crime syndicate just walked through the front door, and the only person in the room who didn't feel the temperature drop, the woman already holding a pot of boiling coffee. The morning rush was Nadia Brooks's natural habitat. She moved behind the counter the way a soldier moves through familiar terrain, precise, unhurried, reading the room without looking like she was reading it, quick hands, quicker mouth, a mind that categorized people in the first 3 seconds and was almost never wrong. She'd worked Café Onyx for 2 years and survived its particular breed of entitled Manhattan customer through one simple policy. She did not tolerate being treated like furniture, not by anyone. Not for any amount of tip money. She didn't know the man who just walked through her door had ordered the deaths of 11 men before 9 a.m. Dante Varro moved through the cafe the way pressure moves through a room before a storm breaks. Nobody saw him coming, but everybody felt the shift. Broad-shouldered, immaculate, a charcoal suit that had no business existing on a Tuesday morning. His underboss Rico flanked him on the left, 2 men in dark overcoats, sweeping the perimeter with the quiet efficiency of people who did this everywhere they went. Dante's phone was already pressed to his ear. His voice, low and clipped, was conducting what sounded like a very calm conversation about something that was clearly not calm at all. He didn't look at the menu. He didn't look at the counter. He simply extended one hand toward Nadia and snapped 2 fingers. She stared at those 2 fingers for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up the freshly brewed large dark roast, still volcanic, still steaming, and poured it in a slow, deliberate arc directly across his outstretched hand and the sleeve of his bespoke suit. The cafe went so quiet you could hear the espresso machine hiss. Rico's hand moved toward his jacket. Dante went very, very still. Nadia set the empty pot down, leaned one elbow on the counter, and tilted her head. "We have a menu board, sir. When you're ready to order like an actual person, I'll be right here." Someone near the window made a sound that was half laugh, half suppressed scream. Dante Varro lowered his phone. He turned his gaze from his ruined sleeve, slowly, the way men turn when they are deciding, rather than reacting, and looked at her for the first time. His expression gave away absolutely nothing. Then his eyes dropped, involuntarily, to the small crescent-shaped scar just visible above the collar of her uniform. Resting beneath her left collarbone, something moved behind his eyes, something that had been locked in a room for 3 years and had just heard a familiar sound through the wall. He said nothing. He turned and walked out. Rico followed, but not before shooting Nadia one look over his shoulder. Not anger, not amusement, something she wouldn't find a name for until much later, when she finally understood what that look meant. It meant, "You have no idea what you just did." Nadia Brooks had no enemies. She had a dead father, a scholarship she never asked for, medical bills that somehow always got paid by accounts she couldn't trace, and the persistent, dismissible feeling that she was never quite alone on her walk home. She had a small apartment on East 83rd, a violin she played at midnight, and the absolute, unshakable certainty that Frank Brooks, her quiet, careful, spreadsheet-building father, had been the most ordinary man who ever lived. She didn't know Frank Brooks had never worked at an accounting firm, not a single day in his life. She didn't know the hit and run that killed him on the FDR Drive 3 years ago had been arranged by a man named Callum Pierce, whose organization Frank had refused to betray, even at the cost of everything. She didn't know that every anonymous payment, every scholarship, every mysteriously covered bill had flowed from the guilt of the man whose suit she had just ruined. She didn't know that Callum Pierce's people had found out Frank Brooks had a daughter, and she didn't know that tonight, while she counts her tips and locks up Café Onyx and walks home the same route she always walks, they were going to come for her. She was going to find out all of it. But first, Dante Varro was going to come back. Welcome to Dads and Mafia Stories, where loyalty runs deeper than blood, and the truth always costs more than anyone expects. If this is your first time here, settle in. And if you've been here before, you already know how this goes. The smell hit you before anything else. Scorched espresso and warm milk, and the particular electricity of a Manhattan morning running 10 minutes behind itself. Café Onyx on West 57th Street was not a peaceful place between 8 and 10 a.m. It was a controlled detonation. Laptops open, phones pressed to ears, suits queued 4 deep, everyone moving like the city would collapse if they slowed down for 30 seconds. Nadia Brooks loved it. She moved behind that counter the way water moves through a narrow channel, fast, inevitable, shaped perfectly for the space she occupied. Quick hands, quicker mouth. 2 years behind this particular bar had turned her into something close to a machine, except machines don't notice things the way Nadia did. She noticed everything. The man in the gray coat who always overtipped because he felt guilty about something. The woman who ordered oat milk but watched the whole milk steamer with longing eyes. The ones who said please and the ones who didn't. She catalogued people in 3 seconds flat. It was a gift her father gave her, without ever calling it one. At 8:47 on a Tuesday, the front door opened. The cafe didn't react the way it reacted to anyone else. Nobody turned around. Nobody looked up from their screens. But the room shifted. Subtly. The way a field of grass shifts when wind moves through it before a storm. Every person in Café Onyx made some small, unconscious adjustment. A woman pulled her bag a little closer. A man near the window stopped mid-sentence and forgot what he was saying. Nadia felt it before she saw him. She looked up. Dante Varro crossed the room like he had already measured it and found it acceptable, broad-shouldered, unhurried. A charcoal suit so precisely fitted it looked less like clothing and more like armor made by someone who charged accordingly. His underboss, a thick-necked man with careful eyes, moved at his left shoulder. 2 others in dark overcoats took up quiet positions near the door. Nobody asked them to, they just knew. Dante's phone was already at his ear. His voice was low, clipped. Whatever conversation he was having, it was the kind that ended with instructions rather than questions. He reached the counter without once looking at it, or at her, and extended one hand sideways, and snapped 2 fingers. Nadia looked at those fingers. She looked at them for 3 full seconds. Then she picked up the large dark roast, fresh brewed, still volcanic, and poured it in one slow, unhurried stream directly across his outstretched hand and down the sleeve of that immaculate charcoal suit. The cafe went absolutely silent. Not quiet. Silent. The espresso machine hissed. Someone's chair scraped the floor. The man near the window still hadn't remembered what he was saying. Rico's hand moved to his jacket. Dante Varro went very, very still. Nadia set the empty pot down. She leaned one elbow on the counter, rested her chin in her hand, and tilted her head pleasantly. "We have a menu board, sir." She gestured toward it. "When you're ready to order like an actual person, I'll be right here." A woman near the window made a sound. Half laugh, half pure horror. A child by the door stared with his mouth completely open, as though he had just watched someone walk into a lion enclosure and offer the lion unsolicited feedback. Dante lowered his phone. He turned from his ruined sleeve, slowly, deliberately, the turn of a man who was deciding something, rather than reacting to something, and looked at Nadia for the very first time. His expression gave away absolutely nothing, and then his gaze dropped. Just for a fraction of a second. To the small crescent-shaped scar sitting just above her uniform collar, below her left collarbone. Something moved behind his eyes, something that had been locked away for a long time and had just heard a sound it recognized through the wall. He said nothing. He turned. He walked out. Rico followed, but not before he looked back at Nadia with an expression she would spend the next 48 hours trying to name and failing. It wasn't anger. It wasn't amusement. It was the look of a man who understood exactly what she had just walked into and knew there was nothing on earth he could do to stop it. Nadia counted her tips. She wiped down the counter. She told herself the man in the charcoal suit was nobody, just another Wall Street ego who needed to be reminded that the world did not revolve around him. She was wrong about almost everything. Nadia's world was small, deliberately so. The apartment on East 83rd was a single bedroom on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. The radiator knocked every night at 11 like it was filing a complaint. The kitchen window faced a brick wall. The bathroom tiles had a crack running diagonally from the mirror to the floor that the landlord had been about to fix for going on 14 months. She kept it immaculate anyway. That was the thing about Nadia Brooks. She could not control the size of what she had, but she controlled every inch of it. Corners were clean, surfaces were clear. The only clutter she permitted lived in a single shoebox on the top shelf of her closet. Scholarship letters she had never been able to fully explain, printed on university letterheads, awarded through foundations she could never find a website for when she searched. She'd assumed, vaguely, that her high school counselor had filed applications on her behalf without telling her. She'd stopped looking into it after the first year. There were other things she'd stopped looking into. The medical bills that got paid, twice, during expensive procedures, by an account number her insurance company claimed was not theirs. The feeling she sometimes got, walking home through the amber glow of the East Side streetlights, that the space behind her was occupied in a way she couldn't prove. She would turn. The street would be ordinary. She would keep walking. Her father had called it good instincts. He'd said it like a compliment, right up until the night on the FDR Drive when instincts didn't matter anymore. Frank Brooks, quiet man, careful man, 43 years old when a drunk driver, or what the police report called a drunk driver, crossed the center line and took everything. That was 3 years ago. Nadia still played violin at midnight sometimes, not for any audience, just because he had taught her, and it was the one place she could still hear him without it hurting quite as much. The afternoon shift ended at 4. Her coworker, and the closest thing she had to a best friend, lingered by the coat hooks while Nadia counted the till. Her name was Sandra, and she had the particular gift of saying alarming things in a very calm voice. "That man this morning," Sandra said, pulling on her jacket, "the one you baptized with the dark roast. What about him?" I looked up the license plate on one of his cars. A pause. "Nadia, that's not a Wall Street man. I don't know what that man is, but it is not that." Nadia zipped her bag. "I've spilled coffee on worse." Sandra opened her mouth. Closed it. Decided, apparently, that some arguments weren't worth having with someone who had already decided. The walk home took 22 minutes. At the 14-minute mark, she noticed the SUV, black, idling, parked just far enough back to be incidental if you weren't paying attention. She was paying attention. She turned the corner at 81st sharply, the kind of turn that forces a following car to make a decision. The SUV did not follow. She exhaled, rolled her shoulders, told herself what she always told herself, paranoia, nothing more. She was almost convinced, if she had looked back one more time, if she had stood at that corner just 4 seconds longer, she would have seen the SUV ease forward beneath the streetlight. She would have seen the small embossed detail on the rear plate, a single letter V pressed into the metal like a brand. She didn't look back. She went home. She played violin until her fingers ached. She slept. And somewhere across the city, in a building she had no name for yet, a man in a ruined charcoal suit sat at a long table and said her name out loud for the first time in 3 years. He came back on Thursday. No Rico. No overcoats flanking the door. No phone pressed to his ear like the world owed him a signal. Just Dante Varro, alone, in a different suit. Charcoal again, because apparently that was simply the color of his existence. Walking through the door of Café Onyx like he had made a quiet, private decision and was following through on it. He sat at the corner table. Nadia noticed him the moment he walked in. She noticed him the way you notice a change in air pressure, not because it announces itself, but because something in you responds before your brain catches up. She finished the order she was making, steamed the milk, slid the cup across the counter, took a breath, then she walked over. He looked up, met her eyes directly. His expression was exactly what it had been 2 days ago, which was to say, nothing. A clean wall. Whatever was happening behind it was entirely his business. "What can I get you?" Nadia said. Not a question. Exactly. "Black coffee," Dante said. "Please." The please landed oddly, like a word he'd selected deliberately from a list of available options, because it was the correct one for the situation. She brought the coffee, set it down. "I don't want any trouble," she said quietly. "Whatever that was the other morning. We're past it. Okay?" Dante wrapped one hand around the cup. I'm not here for trouble. She looked at him for a moment longer than she intended to. Then she went back to work. He sat for 40 minutes. He didn't open a phone, didn't read anything. He simply drank his coffee and occasionally looked out the window with the focused, patient stillness of a man who was used to waiting for things that mattered. When she cleared his table, he was already gone. The cup sat clean on the saucer, and beneath it, folded once, precisely, was a piece of paper. No money, just the note. She opened it by the service counter, angled away from the room. Your father was a brave man. Be careful who you trust, Nadia. She read it twice. Then, a third time. She told herself it was nothing. A strange man playing strange games. She folded it back up, slipped it into her apron pocket, and finished her shift. That evening, she called the number. Frank's old colleague, a man named Derek who had attended the funeral, who had hugged her and said your father was one of the good ones, picked up on the third ring. Except it wasn't Derek. The automated voice told her the number had been disconnected. She tried twice more. Same result. She sat with that for a moment. Then she called the accounting firm. 20 years. Her father had driven to that same building on Lexington Avenue for 20 years. She had visited him there twice as a child. She remembered the carpet. She remembered the receptionist's desk with the little dish of mints on the corner. The woman who answered was polite and professional. She had no record of anyone named Frank Brooks. Not current, not former, not ever. Are you sure you have the right firm? The woman asked. Nadia hung up. She moved faster than usual on the walk home. The door to her apartment was not locked. It was not broken. It was simply open. A few inches. The way a door looks when someone has pulled it shut behind them, but not quite caught the latch. She stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then she went in. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing was missing. The kitchen was as she had left it. Her violin case sat untouched by the window. Her wallet, her laptop, the emergency cash she kept folded under the lining of her winter coat. All of it exactly where it should be. She checked the closet last. The shelf was tidy. The shoebox of scholarship letters sat in its place. But the hard drive was gone. Her father's old hard drive, black casing, no brand label, the one she had carried from his apartment after the funeral and never once found a way into, was simply not there anymore. She sat down on the edge of her bed. The note was still in her apron pocket. Be careful who you trust, Nadia. She pressed her palms flat against her knees and stared at the opposite wall and tried very hard to convince herself that this was still nothing, that there was still a reasonable explanation, that Frank Brooks had been exactly who he said he was. The wall didn't offer her anything back. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't sure she believed her own father's life. Rico was waiting at the service entrance at 6:45 in the morning. Nadia saw him through the glass before she got her key in the lock. She stopped, took one breath, considered, briefly, walking in the other direction. He held up both hands, palms out. The universal language of, I am not here to hurt you, which, in Nadia's experience, was something people only needed to say when the possibility was real. She opened the door. You need to come with me, Rico said. No preamble, no performance. I need to start my prep shift, Nadia replied. The men who were in your apartment last night work for a man named Callum Pierce. Rico's voice was flat and deliberate, like someone reading the terms of a contract they needed you to actually hear. They didn't find what they came for. They will go back tonight. And the next time, they won't be as careful about leaving things tidy. Nadia's hand tightened around her keys. I don't know anyone named Callum Pierce. No, Rico said, but he knows you. She held her ground for another 10 seconds. Then Rico reached into his interior jacket pocket, slowly, watching her eyes, and placed a photograph on the counter between them. She looked down. Her father, Frank Brooks, in a room that was definitively not an accounting office. No carpet, no desk with a dish of mints, exposed concrete walls, industrial lighting, the kind of space that existed specifically to not appear on any public record. He was shaking hands with a man in a dark suit, confident, mid-sentence, gesturing with his free hand, the way he used to gesture when he was explaining something he found genuinely interesting. He looked completely at home. Nadia's legs stopped working properly. She found a stool and used it. Rico drove her to a building she would not have been able to find again from memory. Private entrance. No lobby. An elevator that required a key, not a button. Dante was waiting in a room on the 14th floor. No guards visible, no weapons on the table. Just a man sitting in a plain chair with a glass of water in front of him, and the particular stillness of someone who has been rehearsing a conversation for a very long time, and has finally run out of reasons to delay it. He waited until she sat. Then he told her about her father. He told her Frank Brooks had not been an accountant, had never been an accountant. For 15 years, Frank had been the Varro syndicate's chief financial architect, the man who built and maintained an invisible infrastructure of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and layered financial identities so complex and so clean that 3 separate federal investigations had walked directly through it without seeing a single thread to pull. A ghost in the global financial system, the best we ever had, Dante said quietly. There was no pride in it, just weight. Nadia sat with that for a moment. The FDR drive, she finally said. Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Not an accident. Callum Pierce ran a competing organization. He wanted the master financial ledger, every account, every corporation, every routing code your father had built over 15 years. Frank refused to hand it over. He paused. He was given every opportunity to walk away clean. He chose not to. The room was very quiet. He swerved, Nadia said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. The police report said the other driver swerved. Your father swerved. To take the impact on his side, she pressed her hands flat against the table, stared at a fixed point on the surface and breathed through it. The way you breathe through something that is reshaping the interior of your chest while you are still using it. 30 seconds passed. Maybe more. Then she looked up. Why are you telling me this now? One question. Steady. Dante held her gaze. Because Callum Pierce just confirmed that Frank Brooks's daughter is still alive. His voice was controlled, but beneath it, something tight. Something that had been tight for a long time. He believes your father left the ledger with you, and unlike the men who came last night, Pierce himself does not leave apartments tidy. Nadia said nothing. Outside, 14 floors down, the city moved through its ordinary morning, oblivious, relentless, completely indifferent to the fact that everything Nadia Brooks had ever believed about her own life had just been quietly, irreversibly dismantled. She thought about the violin, about midnight, about a man who taught her to notice things and never once told her why that particular skill mattered so much to him. He knew, she said softly. Not a question. Dante didn't answer. He didn't have to. The penthouse sat 61 floors above Manhattan, like a thought no one was supposed to have access to. Dante's residence was not decorated. It was composed. Every surface chosen with the deliberate restraint of a man who understood that real power didn't need to announce itself. Pale stone floors, high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling glass that turned the city into something that looked, from up here, almost peaceful. Nadia was given a room with a view she didn't ask for, clothes in her exact size she didn't request, and meals prepared by someone she never saw but who understood, without being told, that she didn't eat red meat. That last detail unsettled her more than anything else. She was given everything. She was permitted nothing. The elevator required a code she didn't have. The stairwell doors were sealed below the 58th floor. When she asked Rico, on the first morning, what she was supposed to do with herself, he had looked at her with that same careful expression he always wore, and said, "Rest. It may be a while." She did not rest. Dante barely slept. She could hear him at night. The penthouse was large enough that she shouldn't have been able to, but the floors were hardwood, and his footsteps were deliberate, and Nadia had spent enough years listening to the world instead of watching it, that silence had texture for her. She could map his pacing without leaving her bed. Living room to the window, back to the hallway. A pause. Long. The kind that meant he was on the phone, or staring at something on a screen that required a decision. Then the window again. He carried the night like it belonged to him, and he wasn't sure he wanted it anymore. Every evening, without fail, she played violin. She played because it was the only thing that felt like herself, in a space that felt like someone else's idea of comfort. And every evening, without fail, Dante sat in the armchair in the far corner of the living room. He never asked her to play. He never asked her to stop. He simply sat there with a glass he rarely drank from, and his eyes somewhere in the middle distance, listening in the way that people listen when the music is doing something words haven't been able to do. She told herself it didn't mean anything. Outside, the city told a different story every night. Sirens, 2 nights running, smoke rising from the direction of the Brooklyn waterfront, visible even from 61 floors up, a dark smear against the skyline that Rico did not explain and Nadia did not ask about directly. She was beginning to understand the grammar of this world. What got said? What got left in the air between sentences? Rico appeared and disappeared with the quiet efficiency of a man running a war on 4 hours of sleep and refusing to let it show. Before we go further, drop a comment below. Do you think Nadia is going to trust Dante? Or is she already 10 steps ahead of everyone in that penthouse? Tell us what you think is really going on. On the 4th evening, something changed. Nadia was mid-phrase, a slow, aching passage her father had taught her, one of the first pieces she'd ever memorized, when she became aware that Dante was not looking at the middle distance anymore. He was looking at her. Not the way he looked at problems, not the careful, calculating attention of a man doing math, something quieter than that. Something that had slipped through whatever system of controls he maintained for himself and was sitting on his face without his permission. She didn't stop playing, but her breath shifted, just slightly. Whatever Dante Varro felt about the debt he owed Frank Brooks, that was one thing. She had made a kind of uneasy peace with being someone's obligation. This was not that. This was something that frightened him. She could see it in the way he looked away first, in the way he set his glass down very carefully, as though he needed his hands to have a task. The city flickered below them, 61 floors of distance between them, and everything burning. It wasn't enough distance. The call came at 9:30. Nadia heard Dante's voice change before she heard the words. She was in the living room with her violin, drawing the bow slowly across the strings, and the shift in his tone from the hallway was immediate and total, the way a sky changes when weather is coming, flat, clipped, operational. She set the bow across her knee and listened. She couldn't make out specifics. She didn't need to. Rico's voice came through the door next, lower and faster, and then the sound of movement, purposeful, coordinated, the particular rhythm of men who have done this before and know exactly what it costs to be slow. Dante appeared in the doorway, jacket already on. Something different in his face. Not fear. Nothing that simple. The tightly managed expression of a man absorbing a serious problem and allocating his response to it in real time. Pierce hit our stronghold in Queens, he said, straight across. No softening. I have to go. Nadia nodded once. He held her gaze for a moment, longer than the situation required. Then, Seth is staying. He's my top captain. You don't leave this floor. He was gone before she could answer. The penthouse sealed itself around her. The elevator hummed downward. And then, silence. Seth was already in the room. She hadn't heard him come in. That was the first thing she noticed, that he moved quietly in a way that felt less like discretion and more like practice. He was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. She picked up her bow, started playing again. You're good, Seth said after a while. Thank you. Shame, he said it almost to himself. Conversational, offhand, the way people say things they've been holding for a while and have finally decided to let go of. Nadia's bow slowed. She looked at him properly for the first time, and in the space of 3 seconds, the set of his shoulders, the way his weight had shifted toward her, the fact that his hands were no longer visible at his sides, she read him. Completely. It was the particular cruelty of a man who had been performing loyalty for a long time and had finally, privately, decided he was done. The Queen's situation, Nadia said carefully. You knew about it before the call came in. Seth smiled. It didn't reach anything above his mouth. Pierce doesn't want you dead, he said, pushing off the wall, moving toward her, slow, unhurried, The walk of a man who had already decided how this room was going to go. Not yet. He wants what your father built. Every account number, every routing code, every shell corporation Frank Brooks buried across 4 continents. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. He crossed the rug in 4 steps and grabbed her wrist. She cried out, sharp, genuine, the bow clattering from her hand onto the cushion beside her. I'm just a barista. Her voice broke on cue. She pulled back, shrinking into the corner of the sofa, her free hand scrabbling uselessly at the upholstery. I don't know anything about a ledger. I don't know anything about any of this. Please. Then this, Seth said, leaning in close, his grip tightening until she felt the bones of her wrist compress, is going to be a very long night. Nadia's breath came in short, ragged pulls. Her eyes were wide, her shoulders were shaking. Her free hand found the violin bow on the cushion beside her. Her fingers closed around the grip. And then, so quietly that Seth almost didn't notice, the trembling stopped. Not gradually, not with a breath or a shift or any visible decision. It simply stopped, like a switch. She didn't stand up. She detonated. One motion, no wind-up, no warning, no wasted movement. Her elbow drove upward into Seth's nose with the kind of force that doesn't come from anger. It comes from repetition. From a father who spent 2 quiet years teaching his daughter things that had no place in an ordinary life, because he had long since accepted that her life was never going to be ordinary. The crack was immediate. Seth's head snapped back. Before he could process what had just happened to his face, Nadia's leg swept his feet from under him. He hit the floor hard, the full weight of him, all at once, and by the time his back registered the impact, she had his own weapon free of its holster and the barrel pressed firmly against his carotid. 3 seconds, maybe less. Seth stared up at her, chest heaving, blood running freely from his nose, his eyes cycling through shock, rage, and something that was rapidly becoming fear as the woman above him showed absolutely no sign of returning to the person she had been 10 seconds ago. That person was gone. The ledger isn't a file, Nadia said. Her voice was calm, completely unnervingly calm. My father didn't store it anywhere you could find it. He encoded every account number, every routing code, every shell corporation name, into the original sheet music he wrote for me. She pressed the barrel a fraction harder. I memorized it when I was 16. Every single line. Seth's jaw worked. Nothing came out. I've known Dante's people were watching me for years. She tilted her head slightly. I let it happen because I knew Pierce would eventually send someone, and I needed someone with Dante's resources to finish what my father started. The silence held. Seth looked up at her blank, steady eyes and understood, fully and too late, that he had not cornered a victim tonight. He had cornered the most dangerous person in the room, and he had done it entirely on his own. The penthouse doors exploded open. The doors hit the walls with enough force to shake the glass. Dante came through first. Jacket gone. The collar of his dress shirt torn at the shoulder, a dark stain spreading from a cut above his brow that he had not stopped to address. His weapon was up, and his eyes were already cutting the room for the threat before his feet had fully cleared the threshold. Rico came in behind him. 2 guards flanked left and right, 4 weapons sweeping the penthouse in practiced arcs. They all stopped. The room made no sense for exactly 3 full seconds. Seth on the floor, bleeding, wrist cradled, not moving, and Nadia standing over him, perfectly still, barrel leveled, shoulders square and unhurried, like a woman who had arrived at a destination she had been navigating toward for a very long time and found it exactly where she expected. No panic, no trembling, nothing that even faintly resembled the woman Seth had grabbed by the wrist 40 minutes ago. He sold you to Pierce, she said. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The Queen's hit was bait. He needed you out of the building. He opened the door from the inside. The room stayed silent. Dante lowered his weapon slowly. He looked at Seth, broken on the floor of his own penthouse, and then he looked at her. Really looked. And something happened behind his eyes that had nothing to do with the cut on his brow or the war still burning in Queens. 3 years. 3 years of shadow guardianship, the scholarship, the surgeries, the SUVs running quiet half a block behind her on the east side, 3 years of carrying Frank Brooks's daughter like she was something that would shatter if the wind changed. She had not been fragile. She had been loading. The distinction landed in his chest like something physical. "Rico," Dante said quietly. He didn't look away from her. "Take him downstairs. He talks before morning." "Yes, boss." The sounds of Seth being hauled upright, of footsteps, of the door closing, and then nothing. Just Dante, and Nadia, and 61 floors of city burning quietly below them. He holstered his weapon and walked toward her. The penthouse settled into quiet. Not the tense, watchful quiet of the past 4 days. Something different. The kind that comes after a thing has finally been decided. Dante stopped in front of her. He looked at her for a moment, at the steadiness in her eyes, at the weapon she had already set down on the side table with the calm of someone who no longer needed it for this particular conversation. Then he reached out and gently straightened her collar. A small adjustment, precise and unhurried. Nadia went still. She knew that gesture. She had felt it 1,000 times, standing in a small kitchen on East 83rd, before school, before recitals, before every moment that mattered. Her father's hands, her father's habit. Dante didn't know he was doing it. That was the part that broke something open quietly in her chest. He had known Frank Brooks closely enough to absorb the man's gestures without ever noticing they had taken root. She told him everything. The sheet music, the encoding, the years of standing at her window watching a black SUV idle at the corner, and choosing, deliberately, patiently, to say nothing. Because she had known, the way her father had taught her to know things, that Pierce would eventually surface. And when he did, she would need a fortress and an army, and someone who had reasons of his own to burn the Pierce organization to the ground. She told him what she wanted, not protection, not a gilded cage at 61 floors. She wanted every account frozen, every shell corporation exposed, every asset Pierce had ever touched, seized and dismantled. The complete and total financial destruction of the man who had put a hitman on the FDR, drive and taken everything from her in under 4 seconds. Dante listened without interrupting, without moving. When she finished, the city glittered below them in silence. "You poured coffee on me," he said finally. "You snapped your fingers at me," she replied. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Slow, almost reluctant. The first real thing she had seen on his face since the day he walked into Café Onyx and changed the entire shape of her life. "Your father built an empire with numbers," Dante said quietly. "It seems he also built one with you." He extended his hand. Not a claim, not a command. The clean, level offer of one equal to another. "Callum Pierce dies tonight. Every account he owns goes with him. Are you ready?" Nadia looked at his hand. She thought about her father. About a dark road and a steering wheel turned at the last possible second. About a man who spent his final years making sure she would be standing exactly here, in exactly this moment, ready for exactly this. She took it. New York City had seen dangerous alliances forged in the dark before. In back rooms and basements, over blood and money and broken promises. It had never seen one quite like this. That's the end of today's story, and if you made it all the way here, you already know this one hit different. Was it Nadia's patience that got you, or the moment Dante straightened that collar and didn't even know why? Drop it in the comments. Tell us the moment you knew Nadia was never the victim in this story. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you know what to do. There's more where this came from, and the next one is already coming.